I'm Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. Happy Sunday, everybody. So there are some survey results that I thought it would be nice to go through, to kind of cap out the end of the calendar year. So we'll go through those. There was one study that I'm going to tack onto the end that was just done in October. So it was just released recently that I thought might be good. Something I noticed as the intro was playing was that it was getting a little glitchy. So if it starts doing that again, please let me know in the comments and I will switch my Wi-Fi out. But first, let's say hello to some people. Hi, Adric. He says it's on. He's first. Auntie is in here saying hi. Definitely. And Adric says, let's hear it for the Dancing Maggies. And Adrian says, let's go. Okay, so let's jump in and look at these survey results. So we're going to go backwards from 14 to 1, and then we're going to talk about the this bonus one that I want to talk about because it's how Americans see men and masculinity. And, I talk about masculinity and femininity a lot. So we're going to go through that one. Okay, so this first one is not surprising, but 22% of Americans say the cost of college is worth it, even if someone has to take out loans. So only 22%, right? So just under half of people say it's worth it, but only if you don't have to take out loans. And the cost of tuition is just astronomical. If your grandparent went to college or like post-secondary schooling, ask them how much they paid, because you're going to be shocked. So many people went to school for free. Other people could work a part-time job, pay for school, and pay their bills. Like, the way it is now is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think by the time I ended my master's degree, if I had not gotten scholarships, just with the cost of tuition was about $180,000. So it's crazy to think people want to get student loans anymore. It's unfortunate that you have to. Like, it is ridiculous to try to pay for things out of pocket, and scholarships are kind of out of reach of people. Sorry, there's a hair in my eye. So that is not shocking to me. It makes sense. And the market is a little bit flooded with people with bachelor's degrees and associate's degrees. They're looking at now, those specialized vocational degrees, and you can actually make a lot more money. I can think of two people that I know right now who have vocational degrees who are making six figures young in their 20s, right? So, is it worth it? All right. So here's the next one, number 13. Donald Trump and JD Vance will be further apart in age than any president and vice president pair in US history by almost a decade. So those two have an age difference of more than 38 years. And did you guys know you only have to be 35 to be the president, right? Arbitrary ages, right? It's always arbitrary. Like 18, you're an adult. 21, you can get alcohol, but at 18, you can serve your country and vote, but 25 to rent a car. Like, it's so arbitrary, but 35 to be the president, right? So looking back at all the executive pairs, the largest age gap before was 30 years. So that was James Buchanan, who was nearly 3 decades older than his vice president, John Breckinridge. So what does it mean? I don't know. Does it matter? I hate to sound nihilistic, but does it matter? So the average median age gap was 6.7 years. But you have to look at, where our presidents are so old. They're in their 80s, right? Like they are presidents. The average age of people in a nursing facility are the same, right? So I guess if you have a lot of money, you can be the president instead of going to the nursing facility, right? Adrian says, so it's JD and his grandpa. Got it. I mean, almost great grandpa, right? Like, whew, that's wild. So you can see why that was a bit of a striking find of surveying information. Okay, so the next one is 4 in 10 web pages that existed in 2013 are no longer available today. So they call that link rot. So, so the share of web pages are older content, of course. 38% of web pages that existed in 2013 were not available as of October 2023. The same was true for 8% of pages that existed in 2023. So even for pages that exist in 2021, 1 in 5 are no longer accessible. So there is link rot going on the interwebs. So if you look at this, you know, this, how it just is going down, 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 down. And it's difficult when you want to come up with a web page because, you know, if it's been used before, it can't be used again, but, you know, those pages are not available, so it doesn't matter. So interesting. All right, number 11. Republican X users, Twitter, have become much more likely and Democratic users much less likely to say the social media platform is mostly good for democracy. Okay, so on Twitter, what they're saying is for Twitter, Republicans say that Twitter is good for democracy, and Democrats are saying that it's not good for democracy. So half of Republicans, 53%, that's up from just 17% in 2021. I wonder what happened. Right? So Elon Musk purchased the site, right? Just as a side note, he purchased the site for what it would cost to end homelessness. He just, you know, took out his pocket money and bought Twitter instead, right? So Democratic users who say this, it's fallen from 47% to 26%. So, right. And, you know, X has changed, right? When it went from Twitter to X, it's a bit different. So you can see this chart right here, how stuff is really changing. But for the people who say it doesn't really matter in the end, you know, it's about the same. It's about the same. All right, number 10. So now we're in the big countdown, right? So number 10 is the share of Americans who say Jewish people face a lot of discrimination in society has doubled since 2021. So that was a February survey, took place about 4 months after the start of the Israel-Hamas war. I think as things have gone on, we might be seeing a different response, right? So just 4 months after it started, 4 in 10 US adults say Jews face a lot of discrimination in society today, up from 20% in 2021. And 44% of adults say Muslims face a lot of discrimination in society, up a little modestly from 39%, right? Most US Jews and Muslims perceive a lot of discrimination against the group they belong to, right? So in addition, 89% of Jews and 70% of Muslims say they felt an increase in discrimination against their groups since the Israel-Hamas war in October 2023. The interesting thing is the follow-up that I'd want to know is how are they being discriminated against? Like in what way? It would have been interesting in that survey for them to be given options of, you know, you're not being served at businesses, microaggressions about your looks, your hair, microaggressions about your belief system, or even big things like, are you being arrested more? Are you being charged with crimes more? Are you going to prison more? Like when we think about discrimination, those are the things that we think about, where you passed over for a promotion. Um, that kind of stuff. Like, it would be interesting to see for those who perceive this increase in discrimination. It would be interesting to see in what way. I would have also liked to have seen, like, of all quote unquote minority groups, and I say quote unquote because white people are actually, a global minority. But for the US, it would have been interesting to see, well, hell, just survey everybody. How are you perceiving yourself to be discriminated? That would have been really, really interesting. Yeah. Adric asks, did TikTok make the survey? It's actually from Pew Research. Um, so, and essentially, if you've never been hit up by Pew to take the research, one thing we have to do is we have to take these results with a grain, okay? Because two reasons. One, Pew can be selective about who they ask to complete the surveys. They try to make it as random as possible, but it's kind of like getting hit up for jury duty. Some people always get asked, some people don't ever get asked. So, you take it with a grain that way. And then also surveys, when we're surveying people, people themselves are biased. So it's just, it's kind of like that correlation doesn't equal causation. So using the one we just talked about as an example, just because somebody perceives themselves to have this increase of this really bad discrimination doesn't mean it actually exists, or that it doesn't exist in the way that they say it, right? So when we talk about surveys, it's interesting to see what people are saying. That's kind of where we're at with surveys. This is what people are saying. This is what they perceive. It doesn't necessarily mean any of it's true. When we survey information, it's a little bit different, like the Trump JD Vance age difference. When we survey information means we're looking back across multiple domains to look at something. It doesn't really give you the answer to anything. It's just interesting findings. Okay. Adrian says, well, also, everything is discrimination to Jews, things like history and facts. I said it out loud. I'm going to leave it right there. Adric says discrimination based on feelings. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of what I said, like this is what people perceive. It's kind of like when people say there's a war on Christianity, or there's a war on white people, or there's a war on white men, or whatever it is that people say. This is how they feel. This is their perception. There could be multiple other variables and reasons and things and whatnot for their feelings. So this is just what people think. So it's interesting to look at what people think, but we don't have to think that any of it's true. None of it's been proven. It's just interesting to see what people think. Hi, Chef Mike. Thank you for being here. Season's greetings to you as well, and to the entire live tribe and replay gang, the best live tribe on YouTube, bar none. You can fight me if you think different. Okay, so let's get into number 9. Okay, voters' perceptions of Joe Biden's mental sharpness changed notably during his presidency. Well, I think we did get a little bit of proof of that. So this was in July. Okay. In the final month of Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, 46% of voters said that he's mentally sharp. Okay. By April of 2023, that was down to 33%. By July 24, only 24% of voters described him as mentally sharp. Wow. By contrast, the share of voters who described Trump as mentally sharp increased from 50% in October 2020 to 58% in July 2024. I mean, how old is Biden now? 80 something. I mean, I know Trump's not too far behind him, but we did kind of see, at least in what the media showed us, what we were able to see, we did see a mental decline with Biden. So, you know, that one's, you can kind of see it, right? I don't know that we saw an increase in Trump's sharpness in that period of time, but at least what the media showed us, but we definitely saw Biden's decline, as well as a few other octogenarians, declining. Okay. Number 8, a majority of public K-12 teachers in the US say they are at least somewhat worried about the possibility of a school shooting ever happening at their school. Well, hello. I think anybody who sends their kids to school is worried about that on a daily basis. And so you could see how teachers would be worried about that. I mean, I think it's we're traumatizing our kids. And now these school shootings and mass shootings happen so much. We don't even hear about it anymore. When the first mass shooting happens, first school shooting, Columbine, everybody remembers that, right? But now they just happen all the time, you know? So about 6 in 10 teachers, so 59% say this, while 31% are not too worried and only 7% are not worried at all, which that's concerning to me. I send my kids to school, you better be worried about it. I'm sorry that it's traumatizing to you, but I'm putting my kids in your custody for the day. You better be thinking about it and it better be on your mind, because if stuff goes down, you better be on top of it and keeping my kids safe. So in that same survey, 23% of teachers said they experienced a gun-related lockdown at their school during the 22-23 academic year. That includes 8% who said this happened more than once. Now, they've already been having lockdowns like for 20 years at school. If there's something going on in the public and the community, but now schools' doors are locked all the time, right? So I think a lockdown might mean a little bit different now. A gun-related lockdown would be all the classrooms being locked down, kids hiding under desks, and it's crazy, the world that we live in right now, that we have to be so concerned with children being shot up at school. And actually, what a world that we live in, that we don't even think about it too much anymore, because it happens all the time. Only people who are literally sending their kids to school and the people who work there are worried about it, as well they should be worried about it on a daily basis. All right, number 7. Younger Americans express more sympathy for the Palestinian people than the Israeli people, while the reverse is true among older Americans. Well, let's take a little survey in the comments and for the replay gang. Anybody watching the video. If you have more sympathy for the Palestinian people, put a P in the comments. If you have more sympathy for the Israeli people, put an I in the comments. And if you don't care either way, put the shrugging emoji in the comments. We'll take our own little survey, right? Because it's the reverse is true among older Americans. So, of course, this was done in February of 24. So we're only just a little bit into the Israeli-Palestinian G-side that's going on. So a third of US adults under 30 say their sympathies lie entirely or mostly with the Palestinians, while 14% say their sympathies lies entirely or mostly with Israelis. So the rest say they sympathize with both equally, sympathize with neither, or are not sure. So that would be the by comparison, 47% of people 65 and older, so we're now into those, the octogenarians and older people that we're talking about, sympathize entirely or mostly with the Israelis, while 9% sympathize entirely or mostly with the Palestinians. Okay. So they even went so far as to go, Republican leaning and Democrat leaning to see if there was any differences, right? And then it has the age groups down here. So, overall, this is what it says. Republican leaning people over 65, 70% sympathize more with the Israeli people. However, when we get over here into Democrats, even 65 and older, it's only 25%. You can see even, equally is about the same, but there's bigger numbers over here on equally, right? There's this big stark difference right here. About half of people 18 to 29 definitely sympathize with the Palestinian people more than the Israeli people. So that's interesting, huh? All right, we definitely have peas in the comments. And he says, I've never acted my age, and this proves it as I'm almost 66. Just very on the verge of that, you guys. Auntie's birthday, less than a week away. Tell Auntie happy birthday, guys. All right, let's go to number 6. All right. 6 in 10 Americans say they probably won't get the 24-25 COVID-19 vaccine, according to an October survey, right? So this one's pretty new. Smaller shares say they probably will get an updated vaccine at 24% or already received one at 15%. Okay, so this will not be shocking to people. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to say they probably will receive or have already received the vaccine. That extends a trend seen throughout the pandemic, right? So adults age 65 and older are also more likely than younger adults to say they will get or have already gotten the 24-25 vaccine. Now, raise your hand if you didn't even know there's a brand new booster coming out in 25. And so if you've gotten the 4 previous, you are now going to be requested, wanted, expected, shamed, guilted, poked, prodded into getting a 5th one in 25. So among Americans who say they probably won't get the updated vaccine, the most common reasons are a sense that they don't need it. Unfortunately, that sense does come from some data. When you look at people who are still getting coronavirus and how many of them were vaccinated, there is data on that the vaccinated get it as much as others. And then also concern about side effects, right? Because we're hearing just tons of stuff about the side effects. So it's sort of like, why? But then you can also see why people age 65 and older are like, well, kind of like with the flu shot, you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. But if you feel like that getting the shot's actually worse than, not getting it, then, there's just a lot of data out there to look at, for sure. For sure. But you can see this big, stark difference in the Republican leaning or the Democrat leaning. But what's interesting to me is almost 40% Democrat leaning. That's not a small number. And honestly, I think where we are right now in the world with these vaccines is that it doesn't really, even though the 81 is a big number, we're starting to see it doesn't really have anything to do with your political affiliation where this is concerned, for sure. So, yeah. Adric's got his hand up. Yeah. Adrian says, yeah, because the vaccine is something you need to take every damn year. Rolls eyes. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Auntie says, I'm rolling the dice with no vaccine, myself included. And I've never had COVID. So that's definitely my risk analysis is I don't need it. So I definitely won't be risking all the side effects and different things for no reason. Okay. This one's very interesting. So Most people across 35 countries say democracy in the US used to be a good example for other countries to follow, but has not been in recent years, or that it has never been a good example of democracy. So, very interesting, right? So, looking at the 34 non-US countries, like you're not going to ask the US, are you good? Because US would be like, we're number one. So they were surveyed in the spring, right? So a median of 40% of adults say the US used to be a good example of democracy and no longer is. A median of 22% say the US has never been a good example, while excuse me, while 21% say America continues to be a good example of democracy for others to follow. What's interesting is 21% say America continues to be a good example, and look how often everything we do in our foreign um, entanglements is about bringing democracy, right? It's about bringing our version of democracy. Sounds like the world doesn't want it. Okay. Maybe we just go bring this democracy to those 21% of countries and leave everyone else alone. That'd be great. So, comparing these results with our US survey, we find that Americans themselves are the most likely to say that their country used to be a good example of democracy, but no longer is, right? Like we know we're here. Around 7 in 10 US adults hold this view, as do at least 6 in 10 adults in Canada at 67%, Japan at 65%, and the UK at 63%, Germany 62%, and South Korea at 61%. Oh man. And there's probably a lot of Americans who are saying, and it never was, right? So this is the 34 country median here. So look at all these countries who say, well, it used to be, it ain't now. And the US is the biggest one. Love it. I love it. I love it. And a lot of this, again, think about perception. Like I just talked about perception, right? So much information is coming out, right? To where there would be certain pockets of the demographic who are going about their lives in a state of privilege, not seeing anything that's going on. And to them, that's that used to thing, right? The more they learn, the more they realize it's not. So, that could be some of the perception changes that people are being educated and getting information, right? All right. So, Adrix is never always a contradiction. Yep. Number 4, many Americans, especially young adults, regularly get news from influencers on social media. Now that's a little bit scary, but also, yeah, I get it. So, and you can look at these ages, of course, 65 and older, only 7% are getting their news from social media. So, according to a November study, so really recent, 1 in 5 US adults, including 37% of adults under 30, say they regularly get their news this way. Most Americans who do so say influencers have helped them better understand current events and civic issues, and that the news they get from influencers is different from the news they get from other sources. So, who are these news influencers? 77% have no past or present affiliation with a news organization. So men outnumber women by roughly 2 to 1. And among those who express a political orientation, more identify as right-leaning than left-leaning. Now, the biggest example of this that I can see is, what's going on with Israel and Palestine, because there was this very stark difference between what the news media in the United States was saying and what we were seeing on specifically TikTok, because Palestinians themselves were uploading video, were telling us what was going on, were giving us kind of a play-by-play, were telling us what's happening, where they're at. And then we saw something starkly different in our media outlets. And so you saw just this trove of people moving away from watching the news media and moving more into social media to kind of hear from the horse's mouth. We started having people who were close to what's going on in Sudan and the Congo actually telling us what's going on, showing us things, giving us the play by play, telling us what they're being told versus what's actually happening. And then, our news media is crickets on stuff. And so, again, you will see people look more to social media to try to find more truthful things. The unfortunate thing is on social media, you can say anything you want. And so, there's a lot of false information out there. But when we wanted to hear things from the people who are actually there and the things are happening to, we will seek out, they call them influencers. For me, it's actual people. I want to see what's going on. Although there are people who, oh, who's that gal? She does that under the desk. There are some influencers like that who are trying to give a less biased news. And I think people kind of gravitated towards those things as well, which is unfortunate about TikTok being banned and about TikTok being the only thing our government can agree on, because, that's way more important than dealing with mass shootings, school shootings, systemic racism, over prisoning the population, any type of foreign affairs to help anybody who's being victimized. TikTok's way more important than that, that we got to get rid of it when the vast majority of the country does not want it to be gotten rid of, So again, this is the world we live in, right? This is the world we live in. Okay, so number 3, we're getting to number 1. Most registered voters in the US say immigrants, whether undocumented or legal, mostly fill jobs American citizens don't want. So this is according to an August survey. So 3/4 of voters say undocumented immigrants fill jobs citizens don't want, as opposed to jobs citizens would like to have. A lower share, though, still a majority, 61%, say the same about legal immigrants. So there's large partisan differences in those views. Now, speaking as somebody who works with a majority poverty-stricken and indigent up to unhoused population, I'm going to say that there really is some inherent bias in saying filling jobs American citizens don't want. Because anybody who is unemployed wants a job and eventually will take any job, right? Because it costs money to be alive. You can't just coast without money. And so I think there's some inherent biases in how the information is presented, that the jobs American citizens don't want. We have to think about, when we're surveying people, we may be surveying people who are used to making 6 figures or, above $50,000 even. And possibly they see immigrants taking jobs that they would not want, but also they're not at risk of having to take. Hopefully you guys are following me here. And so what happens is that when immigrants who don't have, maybe they don't have this education that, those upper level jobs are looking for, or they're working on their green card, or they don't have to show an ID, we have to think about their taking jobs that American citizens who have the same problems would want, right? Because people who are in poverty, if they're indigent, people have to move quickly. They have to only take what they can grab sometimes, when being evicted a lot, moving from place to place, having to live a more nomadic life. And so people lose their birth certificates, lose their IDs, lose their social security cards. And so they need those jobs, which are more contracted or don't need an ID. And that's just as an example, right? To show that that statement has some inherent biases in there because um, it sort of denotes that every American citizen then does have access to the job that they do want. And so I think we have to look at while our unemployment rate is what it is, that statement is kind of false and misleading. Hopefully, you guys are kind of following with me over here. Okay. Number two, Republican confidence in U.S. vote counts surged after the 2024 presidential election, while Democratic confidence fell slightly. I mean, the Republican won. So this one's not shocking, right? 7 in 10 voters who supported Republican Donald Trump, 72%, are very or somewhat confident that absentee or mail-in ballots were counted as voters had intended this year. Just 19% of Trump voters said the same after the 2020 election. They lost. I mean, that's 94% of Trump voters are very or somewhat confident the votes cast in person at polling places were counted as intended, up from 64% in 2020. I think this just has to do with who won. And when we have our mindset on who we want to win, and to us it makes logical sense, we sort of get into this this delusional state, I guess, it's a bit delusional that, well, then most people would have wanted exactly what I want because what I want is logical to me. And so if we didn't win, then it's rigged. And I'm not saying that it's not rigged. I don't know. But you could see how logically that would make sense. All right, we are down to number 1. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay, and then we have the bonus one at the end. Okay, so the U.S. centenarian population is projected to more than quadruple in the next 30 years. So an estimated 101,000 Americans were 100 or older in 2024, including former President Jimmy Carter, who reached the milestone in October. I don't know why he didn't run then. In 2054, the number of centenarians in the United States is projected to rise around 422,000, according to a January analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data. So this is a survey of data, okay? So today, 78% of Americans in their 100s are women and 22% are men. There are also racial and ethnic differences within this group. 77% of centenarians are white, while fewer are Black at 8%. So that's lower than what the general population shows. Asian at 7% and Hispanic at 6%. White adults are expected to still make up the majority of U.S. centenarians by 2054. Although their share is projected to fall slightly to 72%, and Asian centenarians are also expected to make up a smaller share by 2054 at 5%, while the shares of Hispanic at 11% and Black at 10% grows. So isn't that interesting? And when we look at these projections, look at that chart. Look at that. And a lot of that has to do with access to healthcare, right? I mean, that really shows the disparity in access to healthcare. And, it's a bit concerning about the gender dynamic there too. 78% are women and 22% are men. That's disconcerting. Especially when we look at our entire government is run by older boomers. So, these older boomers are sticking around. And also think about in our government lifetime appointments, when we're going to have this huge jump in people who are living to 100 and beyond. And then we look at these lifetime appointments in the government. you know, the generation behind the boomers is going to be too old to run the government when the boomers finally die off. Is we're going to have to skip right to millennials, maybe. Hi, Rael. Thank you for being here. Okay, let's look at the bonus survey. Let me get it up here. Share screen. This one. Okay. So this was the bonus. So this was done in October, and these results have come out. So, oh, go to this one. Okay. Make sure I'm on the right one. Okay, so how Americans see men and masculinity. You guys know I talk about masculinity and femininity, so this was really interesting to me. I thought it would be interesting to you. So, Republican men stand out in views of their own masculinity, changing gender roles, and men's progress in recent decades. So, when we look through this one, um, the role of men, like I had said before, the war on men or whatever, it's kind of been at the center of a lot of political conversations. Also, what is a woman has been at the center of these conversations. So people have talked about, attacks on men or attacks on manhood, attack on masculinity. Other people, the other side of that coin is labeling, toxic masculinity, rightly pointing out toxic masculinity, but then also labeling everything as toxic masculinity. More broadly, there's concern about how men are doing socially and economically, right? So, in these conversations, this is also Pew asked 6,204 US adults about their views on men and masculinity. So our survey covered traits people think are valued too much or too little in men these days, how acceptable they think certain behaviors are in men, and how they think men have fared relative to women in various aspects of life. Okay. So, I'm sorry, this was done in September, came out in October. Okay. So here's the key findings. Here's the interesting part, the crux. Okay. So 25%, so a quarter, right? A quarter of these people say that people in the United States have mostly negative views of men who are manly or masculine. This is smaller than the shares who say people have mostly positive views of masculine men at 43%, so almost half, or that views are neither positive nor negative. So that's interesting because when we look at what's put out in social media and this quote unquote gender war and things like that, it's the squeaky wheel kind of thing. When then we survey people, we find out the average person thinks, a masculine man or a manly man, 43% say it's positive, and that's the biggest number. 31% are like, it's neutral. It's neither good or bad. It's only a quarter of people who say it's negative. Among Republican men, 45% do think people have negative views of masculine men. Well, we just saw they actually don't. And that the vast majority of those who feel this way say this is a bad thing. Well, I mean, if you're a man and you think people have a negative view of being manly, yeah, I would think that's a bad thing. Much smaller shares of Republican women, only 24%, Democratic men, 20%, and Democratic women at 13%, say people view masculine men negatively. But that's not what we hear, right? That's not what gets put out to us and what we're told. Republicans and Democrats include those who lean towards either party. So, majorities of Americans say most people in the US don't place enough value on men who are caring, open about their emotions, soft spoken, or affectionate. Which on this side of the fence we call acting like a person. Right? To me, again, we're leaning into the trope, right? We just leaned into the trope of toxic masculinity by saying that these things are not masculine. Being caring, open about their emotions, soft spoken, or affectionate. Or, in other words, human, caring, right? Like that's being a human, open about their emotions, okay, being able to communicate, soft spoken, also called stoic, or affectionate, also called human. You know what I mean? Like we've just assumed that those things are the opposite of masculinity. So, wanted to point that out. 6 in 10 Americans say people in the US don't place enough value on men who are caring or open about their emotions. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to say people don't value men with these traits enough. But even among Republicans, including among Republican men, more say these traits aren't valued enough in men than say they're valued too much. So it's all in the perception, right? Interesting. Views are more mixed when it comes to traits that tend to be associated with traditional masculinity. Okay, well, let's see what they say traditional masculinity is. If these things are not being stoic, being communicative, and just being a caring human are not, then what are they? What is traditional masculinity then? So, on balance, the public leans towards saying that people in the US place too much rather than too little value on men who are physically strong, assertive, or risk takers. That's traditional masculinity. Interesting. Physically strong, assertive, and a risk taker. Right. We've talked about masculinity enough on this channel that I think most of you can see that being stoic um, is part of masculinity, right? But then also being communicative. You don't always have to be assertive, being assertive when necessary. And I'm not sure where risk taking comes into that for sure. Most recently, we've talked about how we can sort of over generalize masculinity as having a builder's mindset. And I just don't see that here. So, about 4 in 10 adults or more say most people value these traits in men about the right amount. Men and Republicans are more likely than women and Democrats, respectively, to say that these traits aren't valued enough in men. Well, I can kind of agree with that because we're not even seeing that it's actually part of being human. So yeah, I guess it's not valued enough. About 6 in 10 Americans or more say it's not too or not at all acceptable for men to join in when other men are talking about women in a sexual way. So if this is 6 in 10, so it's more than half, say it is not acceptable for men to join in when other men are talking about women in a sexual way. 75%. Really? I guess we don't want to talk about how women talk with other women about men. This, I think, is just what we do. It doesn't even say in an aggressively sexual way or in a heinous way or in a non-consensual like in a sexual way. She has a nice backside. Wow. Okay, so also to have many different sexual partners rather than commit to one relationship at 69%, to drink a lot of alcohol when out with friends, 63%, or throw a punch if provoked at 62%. Wow. These are what is shocking to me, right? Because we're saying it's not acceptable for men to talk to other men about women in a sexual way, to talk, to speak, to have conversation about someone who is sexually attractive. Um, then we're gatekeeping how many sexual partners a person can have. Then we say you can't have alcohol when you're out with your friends. And if you are provoked, you are not allowed to punch. I mean, I suppose I would say, how provoked are we talking? But is just this turn the other cheek 100% of the time when you're provoked as a man? This is where we get into we're labeling everything masculine as toxic. This is what I was talking about, where we label everything seen as a masculine trait as a bad thing. Oof. Let's look at some comments. Leon says he just woke up. Good morning, Leon. Rowell says it's gotten to the point that females are claiming men are bitter because men don't allow themselves to be misused to females' benefit, whereas the masculine men don't benefit at all. Can hear that. The expression of emotions by men is deemed unmanly by those who want to take advantage of the productivity men bring without reciprocating back to them. I can hear that too. Raul says Trump locker room talk. I think it's just locker room talk. I think when women are with other women, they will objectify and talk about men's bodies in a sexual way almost all the time. I'm sorry, they will. And when men are with other men, then they may talk about women, objectify women, or talk about them in a sexualized way. Nobody's saying, go rape everybody up in here. I mean, it's just talking about someone in a sexual way. It doesn't even say like in a bad way. It's interesting. I think that's just how we talk to each other as adults. Riles says, turn the other cheek, get your jaw broke. No thanks. I get that. Adrian says, listen, if the backside is nice, me and the homies talking. That's right. And I say the same thing, if the backside on him is nice, me and my girlfriends are going to talk about it. Obviously. But this is what I'm talking about, where anything seen as masculine, even just perceived as masculine, is automatically deemed toxic. So on one hand, just all these people are saying we don't value these things in men enough, but then we're demonizing anything seen as masculine, even if women do it too. Okay, about 4 in 10 men, 42%, see themselves as highly masculine. Wow. So that's interesting. We're seeing these men are seeing themselves as highly masculine, but then overarchingly, when we're surveying people, we're saying the traits in me that are masculine are also not okay. Okay, Republican men are far more likely than Democratic men to see themselves as highly masculine. Okay. Sure. So 43% say they lean masculine, 11% are neither masculine nor feminine or equally both. 4% say they either lean feminine or are highly feminine. There's some more information on that, but it's a minuscule number. It's 4%. So vast majority say they are masculine or lean masculine. Among women, 35% rate themselves as highly feminine. A larger share, 46%, say they lean feminine, while 15% are neither feminine nor masculine or both equally, and 4%, again, it's a tiny number, say they are masculine. Now, one of the things I will talk about women who are in the workforce and things like that have to utilize a lot of masculine energy to be in the workforce. So I can see why that is. That, I lean feminine, but I can't be 100% feminine in this modern society at this point in time, right? But still 35%, which is, great, actually, that many women feel that way. Men and women under 30 are less likely than older counterparts to rate themselves as highly masculine or highly feminine, respectively. A much larger share of Republican men than Democratic men rate themselves as highly masculine. So that's 53 versus 29. The partisan difference is much more modest among women. 38% of Republican women see themselves as highly feminine compared with 32% of Democratic women, which when you look at it, that's kind of surprising. You would expect that much more Republican women would see themselves as highly feminine. Okay. All right. And this last one that I want to go through is most Americans say women are doing better than they were 20 years ago. Boy, wouldn't you want to know what the criteria is for better? But again, it's a survey. And so this is people's perceptions, right? But just keep that in mind. The word better is very subjective. Most Americans say women are doing better than they were 20 years ago when it comes to getting leadership positions at work, getting a well-paying job, and getting into a college or university. So there's the specific criteria that we're looking at what people deem as better at those things, still subject, right? So getting leadership positions, well-paying jobs, and getting into university. The shares saying this are much larger than the shares who think men have made progress in these areas. Dear. Plurality say men are doing better, neither better nor worse in these areas compared with 20 years ago. And Republican men are especially likely to say men are doing worse in these areas today than in recent decades. So, despite seeing more progress for women than for men in the past 2 decades, most Americans, at 81%, don't think the gains women have made in society have come at the expense of men. And that is from an April 2024 Pew Research Center survey. Again, I think we have to think about we're told that this world only has so many resources, and we are set against each other against those things. So when we see men not getting into jobs or not getting the jobs they want, we have to ask at the end of the day, who is doing the gatekeeping, you know, and who is doing these things, not so much blaming each other, I guess. All right. So that was the bonus one. You guys can look at these. There's some stuff about fatherhood. This particular survey is really interesting. Lots of good links if you want even more information about it, right? It's from Pew Research, How Americans See Men and Masculinity, came out October 17th. So that's a good one to look at if you want to look at it. Oh, goodness. Rael says, when the Me Too movement happened, the very people claiming men were toxic began to complain when men pulled back. Why complain when the toxic men pulled back? I totally get that. Adrian says, well, now the entire conversation about masculinity has been hijacked to the point where men see their masculinity through the lens of a woman's grading scale, i.e., women telling men how to man. And you all know how I feel about that. Men tell men how to man, women tell women how to woman. It's if on one hand I say I wouldn't necessarily be wanting my daughter's father to be talking to her about puberty, starting a period, I'm probably the one that needs to be doing that. Then it's only fair that the flip side goes through, right? So men tell men how to man, women tell women how to woman. Okay. Rael says, there's been analysis showing the appeal of Trump for a lot of younger men was the view Trump supported traditional notions of masculinity. The Harris campaign fumbled on the masculinity issue. That's really interesting. Adric says, who's getting the tech jobs? And says that's rhetorical. Hi, Sarah B. Thank you for being in here. Yeah. I think what happens is, and this is one of the complaints, one of the many complaints I have about the feminist movement, is that the way that it was sold to women was that the feminist movement was about giving women more resources to get out of abusive relationships. If they're being beat up, the kids are being beat up and whatnot, and you can't rent an apartment, or you can't get a credit card, or you can't have credit, and so you have no resources, blah, 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 that, you can save yourself from that, or that, men and women doing the same job with the same experience at the same level of education will get the same pay. These are the ways that it was sold to us. When you look into it, it's a bit different. But now we've gotten to this level in neo-feminism. So not only did it not start on a truthful note, the purpose was not truthful, but now in this neo-feminism, we have this, for feminists, anything deemed feminine is demonized. When it was supposed to be about choice and equality, and you can do whatever you want, and the muscles and whatnot. When women want to choose more traditional roles, maybe they want to stay home and raise children, they want to fix their man's plate, they want to do these things, they are demonized. And so it's a bit similar to me when we start talking about masculinity and how it is demonized, and how we're being all pushed to be more gender neutral. I have a bit of a theory about that, in that, worker bees don't have to be gendered. And so, but then when you look at the survey results, a very minuscule amount of people see themselves as gender neutral or see themselves as a masculine woman or a feminine man. Most people see their their gender line up with their sex. And so we have to think about, if a majority of people feel that way, why are we being told stuff that's different? Not to say we should totally ignore people who are struggling with gender identity issues. Um, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, why are we being shown what we're being shown through the media? What's the point? Adrian says we're headed towards mass androgyny. Yeah, rise of the automatons. Yeah, yeah. And so, you will see things being attacked that are deemed masculine or feminine, or masculine qualities being relabeled as feminine, or feminine qualities being relabeled as masculine. You guys, this is what I'm calling for 2025. When you start to see it, you remember that, because again, the push is towards androgyny or gender neutral. Ryle's talking to Sarah B about Tim Walz. Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about, we're at the hour. I mean, we're a little bit past the hour, but I want to talk about what's coming up in 2025, because I think we're going to have some good shows. Sorry, I didn't put in my code correctly in my little tablet. Okay, so next Sunday, we're going to be talking about mind control in the form of reactance. That's something I think people don't think about enough. We understand, manipulation and deflection and projection, and we've heard about a lot of these. I don't think we talk about reactance enough. I want y'all to be able to point this out when you see it, both in yourself and in others, as a way to combat this level of mind control. So we're going to talk about that next Sunday. The first Pivot Point Wednesday of the calendar year 2025 on the 8th of January is going to be about goddess energy, what it is and how to get it. So for women, how to get it and embody it. For men, how to find it and draw it to you in the form of a woman, how to attract the goddess into your life. So what it really is, and how to get it. So that's going to be that Pivot Point Wednesday. So I'm going to do a little bit, it's not a spoiler alert, but a little bit of a, there's a surprise coming for this channel. I'm super stoked about it. I have had the absolute best Christmas present ever given to me is coming. And so there's a little spoiler there that it's coming. And so we're going to be doing something great with that Christmas present that is on its way in the calendar year 2025. So it's going to be great. What is coming up? I'm loving it. Loving it. Adrian says everybody going to be running around in Kanye clothing. Oh, yeah. Just this super beige caftan looking thing. Everybody's going to be wearing that, right? Yeah. We're going to be enjoying 2025. Yeah, Rallis has definitely signed up for those notifications. Yep, we got to get in on it, right? Because 2024, I agree with Cat Williams that was really the year of information and like the truth coming out and people waking up and people seeing what's really going on, people really questioning their existence. And is the world really like this? There was a lot of epiphanies, a lot of red pills, a lot of stuff going on in 2024 that I'm really seeing calendar year 2025 as the, okay, now what? Now we got to start talking about, okay, now what do we do? We get it. We're pissed. Now what do we do? And so I want my channel to kind of reflect that too, about how do we move forward instead of sitting in the muck. There's a place for venting. There's a place for learning. There's a place for pointing that out. And there's lots of channels that do that. So I would like to be able to help people to what do we do now and kind of moving on from there. Thank you guys all for being here on a Sunday. Best Live Tribe on YouTube. Shout out to the replay gang. Hey to you. Definitely put those comments in. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm going to show you a picture of my dog. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together. Bye.